tweaking your recipe is not the way to improve the quality of your beer. Tweaking your process will achieve far greater and better beer quality outcomes. G'day brewers, welcome to the Quality Focused Pro Brewers podcast. My name is Hendo, I'm from the Rockstar Brewer Academy, and as usual, got Adzi with me here today. How are you, legend?
I'm good, mate. How's yourself?
Mate, I'm doing really well. Really well.
That's
I've
good.
got my cup of tea here and I'm staying hydrated. I'm really looking forward to heading to Japan in a few weeks.
Yeah, that's pretty exciting.
Heading to Sapporo in Hokkaido, or Sapporo, as it's pronounced, judging at the International Beer Cup in Sapporo. I haven't judged at the International Beer Cup in Japan since 2019, pre-pandemic.
Yeah, wow.
So I love Japan. I love the food. I love the beer. I love sake.
Yeah, you need to get me along there. I'd love to come and judge it over in Japan.
I'm absolutely keen, mate. It was our good mutual friend Lee McAllister Smiley who got me into that in sort of 2018, into that international judging scene. So, mate, maybe we can do that next year.
Yeah, I'll be very keen.
I'll put in a good word for you. I'll get Lee to put in a good word for you.
Yep.
And away we go and that sort of thing. So, mate, what are we talking about today?
Mate, today I reckon beer quality. How do you?
That's a pretty broad topic there.
100%. No, but that's defining beer quality.
Okie dokie.
So,
all right. So you want to talk about how you define beer quality in the brewery. So you make we make we make the same products over and over again.
Yep.
Sure, you might do the odd seasonal or single batch beer or something like that, but more often than not, professional brewers brew the same beers repeatedly.
Yep. And
aspiring for consistency in the product from batch to batch.
Yep.
And how you define quality in that regard. Is that what you want to talk about?
Yeah. And also want to throw in a curveball, because we also talk about quite often in craft beer that we always want to make the next beer better. So
yes.
Yeah, we want consistency, but that also is balanced with improvement and how that balances.
Continuous improvement is what you're talking about there, mate. And that is absolutely true, right? Is that every quality focused pro brewer, it's not about making the beer the best, right? And thinking that that is the destination. Beer quality in the context of being a pro brewer is a journey.
Yep.
And it's a journey of continuous improvement. So absolutely, I would love to have a chat about that, mate.
Fantastic. So when you're trying to do quality and you're obviously trying to define all of these things, what are some of the problems that can come up or that can get in the way of?
Yeah. All right. So the number one problem that a professional brewer has when trying to define beer quality is not having a definition of quality, right? And so this manifests itself. Well, tasting notes is something really for the consumers and all that sort of thing. Yeah. But even then, there's a lot of breweries out there that just don't even have tasting notes for their beer.
Yeah.
The definition of quality is in the mind of the head brewer.
Yep.
Right. And I don't know. I get really dirty on myself when I make beer, and because I want it to be the best it can be.
Yep.
And in my mind, the goalposts shift quite a lot. Oh, I liked that, or I didn't like that. And you see what's happening is opinion is starting to come into play, right? And so opinion shouldn't come into play. And that's probably another problem, is opinion coming into play when you're trying to define beer quality, right? Because your consumers, they don't give a shit about your opinion and what you think of your beer.
Yeah.
They want to reach into the fridge at the liquor store, the bottle shop, reach for a can of your beer, crack it, and know what they're going to get because they're buying it week after week after week and that sort of thing, right? That's one problem. Another problem is thinking that work production is beer production, right? And it leads to another problem, which is like what I call the black box theory of breweries, right? So what often happens is, and this particularly happens with new professional brewers, is they think that work production, brew day, is beer production.
Yep.
Right. And so what happens is all the focus goes into the recipe and the mashing and the hopping and the Whirlpool and all that sort of stuff and the knockout, and then you pitch yeast, and then it's like,
Yeah. We put
and
it
so,
all in on hot side, and
yeah, exactly. All the effort goes in on hot side, and not as much attention goes into the cold side and the process. So I call it the black box. So basically, what you have is you have brew day and all the focus and effort on brew day. Something happens in the middle, and then beer pops out the other end, right? And it's a lucky dip as to what you're going to get out the other end, right? And it's really hard to create consistency with your beer if your brewery is a black box, right? I don't know if you've ever had this happen before, but have you ever had a batch of beer? Maybe you're having a look at it at the bright tank. Maybe it's gone into a can or a keg or something like that. You poured it into a glass. You've looked at it. Yeah, have a smell. You have a taste, and then you go, something wrong with that. Has that ever happened to you?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Right. That if that has ever happened to you, that's a sign that your brewery is a black box, right? Another problem that can happen is that we talked about continuous improvement, right? How some brewers choose to approach continuous improvement is focusing on the recipe. Okay. They think that if I tweak this recipe, then that will make the beer better. Okay. And so, as we talked about in episode 1, there are 3 parts, there are 3 pillars to a really good brewery, which is you've got equipment, you've got your recipe, and you've got your process, right? And equal attention has to be paid to all 3. But if you're solely focused on recipe without being focused on your process and in some respects your equipment, you've got what you've got, right? That's not the way. Tweaking your recipe is not the way to improve the quality of your beer, right? Tweaking your process will achieve far greater, better beer quality outcomes, right?
And that's not to say that changing the recipe won't change the beer, but it won't change.
No, of course,
won't change the quality of the beer.
Correct. Exactly. Right. So if you're there thinking, I need to add more hops, more dry hop into this beer to increase the hop aroma, the first thing I'm going to ask you is, well, what does the hop aroma level need to be, and what are the characteristics of it? Right. And secondly, what is that beer's brand definition? And secondly, I'm going to ask you, well, maybe you've got a dissolved oxygen issue in your process, right? That's robbing that hop aroma from the beer. That's got nothing to do with your recipe. Right? And then, as I said, the key thing that wraps all of that up, right, is if not knowing what a great batch of beer looks like compared to a not so great batch of beer. Okay. So if you're listening to this podcast now, let me ask you this, right? I want you to think about your biggest selling beer that you have in your lineup, your biggest selling brand that you've got in your lineup, right? How do you know that you've made a great batch versus not a very good batch? And if your answer to that question is something like, I'll just know, or I'll know if it's
when
just
I taste it, I can tell.
Yeah, I can tell exactly, right? Then you do not have a clear definition of what quality looks like in your brewery. That's it.
And so getting that definition down. So what do you refer to it as? Is it your true to brand? Is it your beer statement? What have you?
Yeah. Okay. So quality in beer quality, and I'm going to take a leaf out of, there's a really good book by a lady called Mary Pelletieri, I think her name is, and she wrote this book, I think you can get it through MBAA, about a beer quality manual and that sort of thing. Her definition, her way of looking at beer quality was just such an eye-opener for me. There are 2 lenses that you need to look at, 2 ways in which you need to look at a beer in order to define if it meets your quality expectations or not. And those two lenses are called fit for use and true to brand.
Yep.
Okay. And you have to have both. All right. Now, fit for use is basically he's hitting the numbers, all of the numbers, right? So if there's a thing that can be measured with your beer with some sort of instrument that makes a number, that is called fit for use.
Yep.
Right. So it's things like your final gravity, your beer pH, your ABV, bitterness, color, haze,
temperature,
all those things can be temperature, carbonation. All those things can be measured with an instrument and make a number.
Yep.
Right. And you as the brewer need to set the targets around what those numbers should be. Now, not every brewery has all of the instruments, and I get that. There's varying budgets and that sort of thing out there. But what you are able to measure, you should define clearly what those targets should be.
Yep.
Right. But that doesn't tell the full picture. And this is where true to brand comes in. Now, a true to brand description is a written description of what's the beer supposed to look like? What's the beer supposed to smell like? What's the beer supposed to taste like? And what's the beer supposed to feel like? And it's a worded description. Now, to give you an example, and you have to have both. You have a good quality beer has to be both fit for use and true to brand, right?
Yep.
To give you an example of where you can have a beer that is fit for use but not true to brand is, let's say you have a beer that hits all the numbers, right, for final gravity, pH, and all that sort of stuff, but it's got diacetyl in it when it shouldn't be there, right? That means that beer is not true to brand. We were talking about another beer the other day where that one batch of this beer had, for whatever reason during the process, had no head retention.
Yep.
Right. You would define in your true to brand description that this beer would have a persistent white foam, right? And so you need both. Another classic example of being fit for use but not true to brand is if you're dry hopping a beer and there are hop flecks in the beer from dry hopping. Well, visually, right?
Yeah.
Consumers doesn't want to see your fucking hop flecks in your beer, right? They need to know that a beer is true to brand. Now, both are important, right? But then you've got to put yourself in the shoes of the consumer, right? Consumer doesn't give a shit what your final gravity is, what your final pH is, and that sort of thing. That matters to the brewer because that does cause organoleptic changes to the beer, right? But they do care about what the beer looks like, smells like, tastes like, and feels like. And so all of a sudden, what we've created is a way to define beer quality, right? We have a way to define it for what we present our beer to the consumer to be like, which is true to brand. We have fit for use, which is a way that makes sense for the brewer and the technical aspect of the beer. But both together is really what's important to get a consistent, high-quality beer out into the market every time you brew it.
Yep. Is it too late for breweries who already have all their beers and they don't have any of this stuff to start doing this now?
Oh, no, not at all. In fact, it's the place that when I do, very rare occasions when I do one-on-one coaching in breweries, it's the very first thing that we do.
Yep.
And what we do in the Rockstar Brewer Academy is we write what's called a product specification. All right. Now, most brewers, when they write a beer recipe, they use something like Beersmith or Brewfather or Brewer's Friend or something like that. Now, I use Beersmith.
Yep.
I've used it for nearly 20 years now, right? And I love it, right? Because I'm used to it and all that sort of thing, right? So I'm not saying step away from those apps at all, but what Beersmith does and Brewer's Friend and Brewfather do is you're actually writing a recipe for wort and not beer, right? And what do we sell? Are we selling wort or are we selling beer? We sell beer, exactly, right? We're not selling wort. Wort is part of it, right? But this is commonly the thing that leads to the black box. Again, all the effort is on brew day and wort production and all that sort of stuff. And you can have the most perfect wort in the world with the best wort recipe, but you're not selling your wort.
Yep.
Right? So what we do is we write what's called a product specification, right? We get out of Beersmith, right? We're going to use it for some guidance and some inspiration, but we're going to get out of it, right? And what a product specification does, it does three things. The first thing it does is it defines the raw materials irrespective of the equipment or the batch size. Okay. So there's no kilograms, there's no liters, there's no ounces for hops, there's no pounds, there's nothing like that. What there is though is ratios. Okay. So it's percentages. So let's say you've got your grist, you've got to list out your base malt and your specialty grains, and they're going to be a percentage, and they're going to add up to 100%.
Yep.
Right. Your water chemistry is also a ratio. It's done in parts per million.
Yep.
Okay. Hop contributions. Let's say your hot side contributions. Most things which are more than 15, greater than 15 minutes, right? They're going to have an IBU contribution. They're not going to play too much on the aroma and flavor of the beer. Yes, there are exceptions, of course, but for the most part, they're contributing bitterness. So each hop charge is going to have an IBU contribution. And then for late editions, for me, it's sub 15 minutes, and Whirlpool editions, they're about the aroma and flavor of the beer that the hops are contributing, right? So it's an intensity thing. So that's usually done in grams per liter or pounds per barrel if you're using freedom units, right? So all of a sudden, right? So that's the first thing, right? Is we take the equipment out of the equation, right? So a product specification all of a sudden starts to be a really good tool for beer recipe scaling, right? If you're pilot brewing a recipe, if you're thinking of opening a brewery and you're doing product development, that sort of thing, you need a product specification because you're doing small batch stuff and you're going to scale it up to some commercial equipment. And the last thing you want to do is to scale up your recipe from your, say, 50 liter or half barrel pilot brewery, go to your commercial size thing and have the beer turn out completely different.
Yeah.
Right? That's step one. Step number two that a product specification does is it defines the process, right? This is where we remove the black box. What we do is we break down the production process into phases, okay? And it might be, and usually it follows the same path. It's going to be fermentation. There'll be maturation steps like a diacetyl rest and crash chilling and all that sort of stuff. And there'll be there might be a transfer to bright tank. There might be all that sort of stuff, right? There's different phases that a beer goes through a brewery. And so by breaking down the production process into phases, all of a sudden we can do different things. We can say, well, in this phase, what temperature should it be?
Yeah.
What should the head
these are
pressure
what we
be?
expect at each of these steps.
Well, that's and one of the key things in each phase is there's a thing called a go no go test, right? Which means that before we proceed to the next phase, what does the beer need to look like?
Yep.
Does it meet these quality parameters? If yes, continue. If not, we have things called actions in each phase. What are the things we do to the beer? Am I changing the temperature? Am I dry hopping? Am I doing the first dry hop, the second dry hop? Am I triple dry hopping? All that sort of stuff. Everything has so you have parameters, actions, and a go, no-go test. So parameters is temperature, things like temperatures and pressures and stuff like that. Actions are things you do to the beer. And a go, no-go test is what does the beer look like at the end of the phase? Can I continue? Yes, no.
Yep.
Right.
And a simple example of that is like your VDK.
100%. Yeah. Before you crash chill a beer. Great example, right? If you crash chill a beer and you haven't passed a diacetyl test, there will be no opportunity for the yeast to clean up that diacetyl, right? So to go from the diacetyl rest phase to the chill phase, one of the things in the go no-go test is going to be VDK pass.
Yep.
Right? Once you've done that, then you go, okay, it's past VDK, I can continue.
Yeah.
If you crash chill that beer without doing that test, you are going to wind up with diacetyl and you'll finish beer for some reason.
Yep.
Right. So that's the thing, right? So we've got the raw materials, irrespective of equipment. We've got our process documented. And the third part of a product specification is a clear definition of quality in both fit for use and true to brand. Right. I would encourage you to try it, right? Is that before you even go and brew a beer for the first time, write down what you think it's fit for use and it's true to brand, the targets should be, right? Here's why a true to brand description, right, in your definition of quality is so important, right? Beer goes through the brewery, comes out of the tank, you look at it, you smell it, you taste it, you go, there's something wrong with that, right? If you're standing at the bright tank, or you just cracked a can, or you pulled it out of the tap at your tap room, that sort of thing, and you're saying to yourself, there's something wrong with that, right? A, it's too late to fix it, right?
Yep.
It's too late to fix it. Whereas if you have a product specification, right, you have your go no go test. So if something, one of the go no go tests doesn't meet it, what's happened is your beer has started to skew off into not meeting the quality specification of what the beer should be, and there's your opportunity to take action to correct it. Right, and it's just tapping the beer in the right direction as it goes through the brewery.
Yep.
Because if you're at the tap room, or if you're at the bright beer tank and the beer's all carved up, ready to pack, and it's not what it's supposed to be, it's too late.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
And the second thing that a true to brand description does in that scenario where you've got, oh, there's something wrong with that, is true to brand descriptions are really good for troubleshooting issues with your beer. Brewers have a really good, I'm sure you've seen this, Adsy, right? Whenever there's something wrong with that, with the beer, brewers who are engineers go instantly into troubleshooting mode.
Yep.
Right? Oh, it could be this, or it could be this, could be this. Fucking red herrings everywhere, right? And you're wasting your time.
Yeah.
Right? If you go down that path, right? But let's take the beer that we were talking about before, right? The one that didn't have the good head retention on it, right? Okay, so instead of looking at it and going, there's something wrong with that, it takes the emotion out, right? And I can say that beer is not true to brand because it doesn't have the white foam for its appearance. And all of a sudden, it's like, okay, now I can be laser focused on that issue.
Yeah.
And I can start to diagnose what's wrong with that beer, what might have happened to the beer. A really good exercise is to do the 5 whys, kind of out of the scope of this talk, but start to troubleshoot and be laser focused on troubleshooting, right? And then all of a sudden, and all of a sudden, here comes the continuous improvement. You correct that one thing, and your next batch of that beer gets slightly better than the last time you brewed it.
Yeah.
And it's like compounding interest when you put money in the bank, right? The more you compound those tiny, tiny changes, and notice we haven't even tweaked the recipe.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
We're making better beer.
This also isn't to define blame, back up the chain and go, this is that on that. It's just so that you can go, hang on a minute, this is the process that we need to refine better. And you can keep continuing to improve not only your process, but your beer as well, the quality further down.
You would have seen it. You would have seen it in some of the breweries that you've worked in.
Yeah.
Where a batch of beer hasn't worked out right, and all of a sudden the emotion level goes right up.
Yep.
Right? Because there's money involved. There's a business involved, right? And as the brewer, right, you don't want to make, no brewer wants to make beer that doesn't meet their quality expectations, right? But it's going to happen.
Yeah.
Because brewing beer is manufacturing, and manufacturing is an at-risk proposition. And the difference between a good brewer and a great brewer is 2 things: measure and control.
Yep.
End of story, right? If you haven't set the quality targets of what your beer should be, both in terms of fit for use and true to brand, then what happens is you've set the bar, or you haven't set the bar clearly, or beer quality is this fuzzy thing down a foggy road in the middle of the night, and you go, oh, there it is.
You're just sending it.
You're just sending it and hoping it works out for the best and that sort of thing. Or maybe you're a brewer who gives a shit too much, but still hasn't clearly defined quality, right? And in your mind, you have set the standard of what quality is. And if you set the standard for what you believe quality of a particular beer that you brew is in your mind and haven't written it down, I guarantee you will have set the standard so high that failure is inevitable.
Yeah.
Right? And this is where the emotions come into it. If the emotions come into there's something wrong with that type conversation, you're never going to troubleshoot it, right? It's just going to devolve into fucking blame game and finger pointing and all that sort of stuff. And they're not constructive conversations, and they certainly don't help you to make the beer better the next time that you brew it.
Yeah. And if you think also that you can remember what the very first batch tasted like, and then you've done 2 or 3 in between that haven't met that standard, and then you try and brew again and get there again, you're not going to have that.
Absolutely. You've hit the nail on the head, mate, right? Let's say that you brewed a really awesome batch of IPA last October, right? Now, that IPA that you brewed last October, beer's a perishable product. It is, even if you still had it, it is not going to taste, it's not going to have the same quality characteristics. It might still be fit for use, but it's definitely not true to brand, right? Because the hops will be oxidized, it'll be stale and not fresh and all that sort of stuff, right? So you can't keep the beer in perpetuity, right? And you can't remember exactly the characteristics of that beer. And so again, the human mind is just awash with just mush that goes through all of our brains all of the time. And we can't remember what that IPA exactly tasted like last October, right? And so the only thing that you've got to be able to clearly define quality is not rely on past batches, but to write down what the beer should look like, smell like, taste like, and feel like, and what the numbers should be.
Yeah. The beer competitions measure beer quality to a degree. Should you be using them for any of this definition in your true to brand or stuff?
Yeah, so it's an excellent question. Okay, I encourage the members of the Rockstar Brewer Academy to enter competitions because it gives them external blind feedback. However, a product specification and a fit for use and true to brand description of your beer, right, isn't going to help you in a competition. What a product specification is and fit for use and true to brand is how you show up to your consumers, right? With competitions, it's more about style guidelines. And and you might be listening to this right now and saying, well, I don't enter competitions because I don't brew beer to style. Okay. Then I would say to you, well, what standard are you brewing your beer to?
Yeah.
Right. And if you say it's your standard, then you haven't clearly defined it, or you probably haven't communicated it to anybody else in your brewery. So having a fit for use and true to brand description is your standard of what you want the beer to be like, where you write it down, where you're not in Beersmith and you're not in Brewfather, right? And you're saying, my beer is like this. And a lot of people think that it's really difficult to do descriptive analysis of beer. And we'll talk about sensory programs in breweries in another episode. It's not hard to write a true to brand description for a beer. It's really easy once you know how. And by basically taking a true to brand description takes emotion out, right? You know when you've hit your finishing gravity, right? You know when you've hit your beer pH because there's a fucking instrument that tells you, right? And a good true to brand description is written in a way that's very clear and succinct in a couple of sentences that says what the intensity of the characteristic should be and what that characteristic is, right? It becomes either pass or fail.
Yeah.
Right. And it's just so easy just to take the emotion out. And it's a very powerful thing for continuous improvement.
Yeah. That's awesome. Is there anything that you want to go over that you haven't had a chance to, that you're thinking about now? Or
oh, mate, I think that pretty much covers defining beer quality. So just to recap, having a fit for use true brand description is one thing. Documenting your raw materials, irrespective of the batch size and the equipment that it's brewed on, and then documenting your process. You need those three things.
Yeah,
right?
and everyone would have a spreadsheet or a Word document that they can use for this. Like, it doesn't have to be in Beer 30 or whatever. It can be.
No, that's right. In fact, you don't. It's separate to things like Beer 30.
Yeah.
Right. This is something that resides outside of any IT system. So how we in the Rockstar Brewer Academy community, you'll get the template on how to write a product specification, and there's a really good training on how to write a product specification and how to create a true to brand description.
Yeah.
And you can literally have it done in a couple of hours, that sort of thing. That's one of the resources that the community members have available to them, and it's really good. So if you want to know more about that, do reach out. I would love to hear from you. You can reach out to us at qualityfocusprogrowers.com, or you can join the free Facebook group.
Yeah.
And join the conversation over there. I'd love to hear from you and that sort of thing. And mate, this has been a really good chat talking about defining beer quality. I appreciate it.
True to brand. I'm very stats orientated, and I like things to be just right. And
yes,
well,
it's especially important in your role because you're in a tap room.
Yeah. So I love beers and all different types of beers, and that's great. And I love continuous improvements, but man, I just love when things are right. And
well, this is the other thing as well, because you would have definitely been in that situation where you get a customer complain about a beer.
Yep.
Right. And all of a sudden, very quickly, the emotions can go up again. Oh, customers complain on that sort of thing, and the data can very quickly go out the window if you haven't clearly defined quality.
Yep.
Right. And then the red herrings and the clutching at straws, trying to troubleshoot the problem starts all over again. Right. Whereas if you have a very clear definition of quality of your beer, you can acknowledge the consumer, make it right. Don't be defensive. Don't be dismissive. Don't tell him, nah, he doesn't know what he's talking about, because that's the sign of not a very good brewer at all, right? Don't be defensive. I know you've put your hard work into the beer, but sometimes things don't go right, and you need to be inquisitive to find out what that thing was that went wrong so you can make your beer better and use your product specification, right, to work out what the customer is detecting. Because you've got to remember, consumers, they're not trained sensory specialists.
Yeah, that's right.
They're not industry folk. They want to sit at your brew pub and smash a couple of pints with their friends.
Yeah, exactly.
And talk about life, the universe, and everything. So, the defining quality protects you from those awkward consumer situations, that sort of thing. So there you go.
Nice one,
Mate, thanks very much for the chat today. Don't forget, you can join us at qualityfocusprogrowers.com. Would love to hear from you in the Facebook group and that sort of thing. Thanks very much for joining us, and we'll catch you in the next episode. Cheers.
See you later, guys. Cheers.